Oftentimes on this show, we have very positive coverage when it comes to marijuana legalization. So a few of our viewers were concerned when a new study came up indicating that cannabis use could have some negative consequences, okay? And I think it's only fair that we cover that story as well. Now, this is regarding a 20-year study that was published in the scientific journal Addiction. And the reason why this is a very relevant study is because obviously it's a long-term study. It started in the early 1990s. And what they wanted to look at is whether or not there's been any type of changes in the type of marijuana and whether or not it has negative or adverse health consequences for people who smoke it regularly. Now, first of all, let me note that the majority of studies that were done on marijuana that were credible happened in the 1970s. And two things have changed since then. Okay, so I'm going to tell you those two things. Recreational cannabis use has become almost as common as tobacco use among adolescents and young adults, which means there are simply more weed smokers to study. So that's relevant. And also, today's weed is about 4 times as strong as it was 30 years ago.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me.
Well, you know, a lot of people say like, oh, I remember the good stuff back in the day, you know, like because they have nostalgia for the good times they had in the past. Well, it turns out, no, the good stuff's today. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have much experience in it, so I'm sure some experts would know better as to what the good shit is.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I don't have much experience in it either from the 70s, so I can't really tell. Yeah. But anyway, so what's interesting is, you know, some people have emailed this story in and they're like, see what it says? Marijuana's bad. But actually, the study hasn't told me anything that we didn't already know. Let me break it down. So the research still shows that you can't overdose on cannabis. In 1993, the evidence indicated that the risk of a fatal overdose from using cannabis was extremely small. That's still true. The amount of marijuana required to trigger an overdose is somewhere between 15 and 70 grams, which is a far greater amount of cannabis that even a very heavy cannabis user could use in a day. Okay, so we already knew that. You can't overdose from marijuana. That's the positive finding from this 20-year study.
Okay, so far I haven't seen the downside at all. We got better weed today. Okay.
Well, okay, so the downside, again, is something that we already knew, all right? A meta-analysis found that recent cannabis use indicated by THC in blood or self-reported cannabis use doubled the risk of a car crash. Basically, if you're smoking weed and getting behind the wheel, it's a really bad idea.
Who didn't know that?
We already knew that.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Wow, you got him.
So here's the, I guess, relevant finding that I think is important, and we have talked about this on the show before. They talked about whether or not marijuana is addictive, okay? Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between dependence and a chemical addiction. Marijuana is not something that you'll get a chemical addiction from, but if you're smoking it every day, it could happen that you become dependent on it. So the study says 1 in 6 people who start using cannabis regularly in adolescence develops a dependency, compared with around 1 in 10 who start using it as adults, okay? And then they also talked a little bit about what marijuana could do to your IQ if you start smoking it at a younger age.
Higher, right? Higher. I'm gonna guess higher. No?
Again, this is something that we talked about. If you're young, if you're an adolescent smoking marijuana, it could have negative impacts on your learning skills, or your learning abilities, I should say. Increasingly sophisticated studies since 1993 have consistently found deficits in verbal learning, memory, and attention in regular cannabis users. These effects on IQ were found only in the small proportion of cannabis users who initiated in adolescence and persisted in daily use throughout their 20s and into their 30s.
Yeah, those are known as potheads. Okay. All right, so look, does it have some downsides? Come on, dudes. Of course, right? So you shouldn't drive with it. It's not a good idea. Normally, we've seen a lot of anecdotal stories about how the pot drivers are driving too slow, not too fast. They're like, dude, how fast was I going? 75, 90, no, 15, you were going 15, right? But that's still dangerous, right?
Yes,
it's still a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm not convinced that it's not going to lead to cancer, right? In terms of if you over smoke it.
Lung cancer, right?
Lung cancer, right? And so, but the rest of the nonsense with the tobacco, it's now as much as tobacco because people are smoking less tobacco and they're smoking more weed. And if the weed isn't bad for you, then who cares that they're smoking more of it, right?
And regardless of what the findings of that study would be, right? It's not going to change my ideology on drug policy. I want to legalize everything, right? And the reason why I want to legalize it is because I want people who use drugs, or abuse drugs, I should say, to get rehabilitated. I don't want to criminalize them, okay? So for those who send me that story and they're like, see? No, the war on drugs has been a complete and utter failure. This is not enough evidence for me to change my mind. I'm in favor of legalizing heroin.
Yeah.
Again, because I want to help these people who use it, not because I want to do it, and not because I think it's a good idea for someone to do it.
Yeah. You see, where they legalize it, the rates, usage rates go down. They don't go up. Okay, so get your facts straight. And to give you a sense of what a dork I am, when I was younger, the reason a lot of people think I didn't drink because they're like, oh, religious beliefs or something. No. I had read a study that when I was a kid, high school some point, that alcohol lowers your IQ if you drink too much alcohol. So I was like, oh my God, I don't want to touch my precious IQ. So that's why I didn't drink, and I didn't smoke pot.
Yeah.
So if you say, hey, don't have your kids do any of that stuff till they're older, 18, whatever, right? Good luck, first of all. But great, no problem, right? But you can occasionally smoke pot when you're an adult. Have at it, Hoss. All these studies don't show enough of a downside to even make a dent. And there's all those studies that show actually an upside.
Yeah.
Plus, you get high. Like, people always discount that, like it's no big deal. Like but we shouldn't take that into account, okay? But that's why we do it, to get high. Of course you should take that into account. It's okay to have a good time.
Yeah.